in academics for a very long time. September always feels like a brand new year. And this is actually a really good opportunity to have this topic for our kickoff. And it's about the responsible conduct of research. And it's something that I think all of us think about, and we know, and we probably, every single one of us are absolutely doing incredibly great things when we're talking about the conduct of our research. But there are a lot of things to consider, and there are a lot of ways in which ourselves as researchers can be vulnerable, and there are regulations and there are best practices, and it's important that we keep on top of them and that we really understand what it means to conduct research responsibly. So today we have sort of a two-part seminar. One is from our guest speaker, Karen Wallace, and the other one is from Megan Riley from our Office of Research Compliance, and she'll give us the sort of the institutional angle as well. So Karen is the Executive Director of the Secretariat on Responsible Conduct of Research, and that is partly responsible for the implementation of the tri-agency framework on the RCR, Responsible Conduct of Research. So that is the presentation and the context that Karen will be bringing to us today. And it's also about the, together with the Tri-Council policy statement on the ethical conduct for research involving humans, which we know as TCPS, on behalf of all of the federal research agencies, so CIHR, NSERC, and SSHRC. And since joining the Secretariat in 2011, so Karen is by all means the expert, she's been playing a key role in the agency's commitment to promoting and fostering a culture of ethical and responsible research. She speaks nationally and internationally about our approach, the Canadian approach to RCR. And prior to joining the Secretariat, Karen worked on CIHR's ethics office for 7 years. So again, a seasoned expert with regards to ethics and responsible conduct of research. She also helped develop the 2009 working group tasked with developing the first RCR framework. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Karen today give us her presentation, and then we're going to have lots and lots of time for questions. She's promised to make this sort of enough time that we can really discuss and make it so that we're not just talking about frameworks here. We're really talking about how best to implement these practices and policies. So please think of and save your questions and those online as well for the end of the presentation. And then we'll have Megan join and give sort of, again, that Heart Institute specific context. So welcome, Karen. Thank you so much.
Kind words, Dr. Rayner, and thank you, Megan, for the invitation to speak with all of you today. It's very exciting. This is one of the first in-person presentations since COVID, so it's really exciting to see so many people here and online as well. So, the title of my presentation is really important because responsible conduct of research, it affects everyone. It's everybody's business. Whether you're a research trainee, you're a researcher, you're a student, it is important. It affects you, so it's really everybody's business. So I'll just give a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So talk about the Secretariat, who we are, what the responsible conduct of research is, and responsible conduct of research, short form, RCR, so I'll be using RCR throughout the presentation, and why does it matter? Also talk a little bit about the actual policy, the tri-agency framework on responsible conduct of research, and also talk about what can happen when things go wrong in research. Some good practices in responsible conduct of research for you to consider, provide some examples of effective RCR outreach, and how we can all promote RCR. Was created back in 2001 as the Secretariat on Research Ethics. It had one mandate. It was the ethics of research involving humans, TCPS. And then in 2009, there was a decision by the three agencies, so CIHR, NSERC, and SSHRC, to create one policy, one-stop shop for responsible conduct of research and research ethics. So in 2011, the Secretariat expanded to increase its mandate to not only research ethics, but also RCR. So we've got those two mandates, and we're responsible for two policy documents, as Dr. Rayner referred to earlier, the RCR framework and the TCPS. And we also support 2 interagency advisory panels, Panel on Research Ethics and the Panel on Responsible Conduct of Research. And they are volunteer members from around the research community across the country with expertise in research ethics or responsible conduct of research. RCR. I'm going to actually read this slide because it's very important. It's the behavior expected of anyone who conducts or supports research activities throughout the life cycle of the research project. So that goes from the formulation of your research question to the design and the conduct of the research, to the collection of the data, to the analysis of the data, to reporting, publication, and dissemination of the research results. And it also has to do with managing your research funds responsibly. And it involves the awareness and application of established professional norms and values and ethical principles that are essential in the performance of the conduct of research. And those values include honesty, fairness, trust, accountability, and openness. So RCR is kind of the umbrella term for the conduct of research, because when you think of it, research ethics is kind of like a subset of responsible conduct of research, because, you know, if you're doing research involving animals or humans, you have things you have to follow, but it falls under the rubric or the umbrella of responsible conduct of research. RCR matters for a variety of reasons, and first is, not in no particular order, of course, it encourages and promotes a positive research environment. And there are, you know, in various countries across the world that have different perspectives with regards to research misconduct, RCR, research integrity, and we want to make sure that it's seen as a positive approach, as opposed to, you know, penalties or discipline that can be imposed when things go wrong. Of course, we do that as well, but that's not the main reason for RCR. It's really to promote a positive research environment. It demonstrates public accountability. Obviously, stewards of public funds, we need to make sure that the money that we give to researchers to conduct research is being conducted appropriately. It's a foundation for public trust. I can tell you that it's very hard to earn public trust, but it's really easy to lose it. In one snap of a finger, you can lose the public trust by an article in a newspaper about somebody doing something that they shouldn't have been doing with research funded by the agencies. And it ensures a reliable research record. We want to make sure that people, when they're reading what's out there about the research that was conducted, that it's accurate, reliable, and true. The RCR framework, it's a joint framework of the 3 agencies. And as I was saying earlier, the agencies, each agency, so NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR had their own way of dealing with research integrity and issues that would come up in the event that somebody didn't follow research properly. And they decided, you know, why have 3 different processes? Let's just have one. So it's a joint framework, and it was created in 2011. And it describes the responsibilities of the 3 key players in responsible conduct of research. So it's not, the onus is not just on researchers. The onus is on researchers, it's on institutions, and it's on the agency. So we all have a role to play in this. Breaches, and I'll talk a little bit about what breaches are, but basically it's it also, what the framework does, it sets out the minimum responsibilities that institutions have to have in their own RCR policies. So every institution that's eligible to administer funds from the 3 funding agencies has to have an RCR policy, and it has to meet the minimum requirements of that document, of the framework. And it also sets out the process that the agencies follow in the event of a breach or an allegation of breach of the agency policies. So that you know, our first RCR framework was released in 2011, and we have a mandate to update it every 5 years. So the second update was in 2016, third was in 2021, and we can all do the math. The next round is set for 2026, which, when you think of it, 2 years away, but it's coming real fast. So we're actually starting to look at how we want to revise the framework, what sections need to be revised, what we need to add to it, things of that nature. So the process has begun. This is the framework. I'm not going to read that to you, but we just want to make sure that the decisions that are made by the agencies when they give out their money, it's based on accurate, reliable information. We also want to make sure that researchers are using their funds responsibly. We want to make sure that we promote and protect the quality and accuracy and reliability of the research funded by the agencies, but also promote the fairness in the conduct of research and the process for addressing breaches. So given that we have a framework that all institutions have to have or have to meet minimum requirements, if you're at the University of Ottawa, Columbia, the policy is going to be pretty much the same thing. The minimum requirements are expected. So if you move around across the country, the same expectations are still going to be moving with you. And obviously promoting transparency in instances of serious breach. And I will get to that in a little bit. So who does the framework apply to? It applies to anybody who's holding agency funds or who actually, oh, hi, Kelly. I didn't notice that you were there. Nice to see you, sorry. It also applies to anybody who's applying for agency funds. So even if you don't hold funds, but you're applying, you're expected to follow the rules for applying to the agencies. Eligible institutions must develop, as I said, and administer an agency policy or an RCR policy that meets the minimum requirements of the framework. And most importantly is the institutional RCR policy applies to all research conducted under the auspices of the institution, regardless of the funding source. So we're saying institutions have to have a policy, but in terms of the reporting requirements, in terms of if it's an agency funded research, that's when it kicks in. If the agency research is funded, it comes to us to get more information about the situation, but regardless, an institution has to apply the policy to all research conducted under its auspices. A little schematic of what I was saying about the, it's a shared responsibility. So it's not just the onus is on researchers, it's on the researchers, institutions, and agencies. And as you can see from each point in the triangle, what connects the two and you are working at an institution, you have to abide by their institutional policies. If you're a researcher and you're applying to the agencies or you are holding agency funds, you have to comply with agency and application requirements and funding requirements. And if you're an institution who's eligible to administer agency funds or who wants to be eligible, you have to sign an agreement on the administration of agency grants and awards by research institutions that requires you to comply with various requirements. Research is conducted involving humans at your institution, that you're following the TCPS and what have you. Next two slides, just briefly, what are the researcher responsibilities in the RCR framework? So we obviously want people to be striving to be the best they can be at being a researcher. And what that includes is using a high level of rigor in proposing and performing your research. You want to make sure that you keep accurate records of your research. In terms of accurate referencing, you want to make sure that you accurately reference published and unpublished work. With regards to authorship, you want to make sure that you include all authors with their consent and only those who have made a substantial contribution to the work and who accept responsibility for the contents of an application or of a publication. So everybody, every co-author that's on a publication is responsible for the contents of the publication, regardless of what part they were responsible for. You want to make sure you acknowledge all contributors and contributions to the research. And, you know, I know conflict of interest is a hot topic these days, and appropriately so. And we want to make sure that individuals appropriately identify and manage conflicts of interest, because everybody will have a conflict of interest whether personal or work-related, it's being able to identify the conflict of interest, disclose it, and manage it appropriately. So if you can always kind of think about that in the back of your mind when you're going to be doing something, at least you are being proactive, as opposed to something coming forward after the fact saying, oh, you know, Megan, did you think about this? This looks awfully, you know, biased. There is that perception of conflict of interest. What did you do about it? And if you can say, well, this is what I thought about when it first came to me, or when I first thought of it, at least you had a plan, right? So those are the kind of research integrity responsibilities in the framework, but there are a few other non-research integrity related responsibilities, such as providing true and accurate and complete information in your grant applications. So we want to make sure that the agencies, when they're making their decisions about whether or not to fund you, that the information that they're relying on is accurate and complete. We want to make sure that you are using your grant funds responsibly and in accordance with the agency's funding policies and financial policies, complying with applicable agency requirements and legislation for the conduct of research. So as I was saying earlier, if you're doing research involving humans, you want to make sure that you're complying with the TCPS. If you're doing research involving animals, you want to make sure that you follow the Canadian Council on Animal Care guidelines. Rectify breaches. That seems easy, but that goes a long way. If you know that you've done something wrong, fix it. Fix it, identify, say, you know what, made a mistake, this is how I'm going to fix it. Comply with agency policies on peer review. So if individuals are members of, let's say, CIHR's peer review committees or the College of Reviewers, you have a responsibility to comply with those policies as well as part of the RCR framework. A new responsibility that was added in 2021 to the framework was ensuring appropriate supervision and training in the conduct of research. Of the institutions, we want to make sure that, of course, they create that RCR policy that meets the minimum requirements. They are responsible for addressing allegations of breaches. So if somebody comes forward and says that an individual is plagiarizing in a publication, or they're falsifying data in their research, it has to be looked into. And who looks into it? It's not the agencies, it's not the Secretariat, it's the institution where the individual is employed or has an affiliation. So they are responsible for ensuring that they look after or they address those allegations. And as I was saying earlier, if the activity in question is funded by one of the three agencies, that's when the institution has a responsibility to report to us. So if it's funded by CIHR, there's a responsibility to report to us. If it's funded by the Heart and Stroke Foundation, but they don't have to report to us because it's not one of the three agencies that fall under the framework. But the institution still has a responsibility to look into that issue. It's just the reporting mechanism that's a little different. Have a responsibility to promote education on and awareness of the importance of RCR, which is exactly what is being done today. So bravo to the Heart Institute for that. And then the agencies, we have a responsibility as well. And when I'm saying we, you know, the Secretariat is the body that represents the three agencies. So that's why I'm saying we all the time. So we assist researchers and institutions in interpreting the RCR framework and in implementing it. We also address allegations of breaches by ensuring that institutions are addressing them. There's certain timelines that have to be abided by institutions when issues arise, and we make sure that we oversee that. We determine appropriate recourse when there is a confirmed breach. So if there is, you know, if somebody has been found to have falsified data or plagiarized data, the institution can take their own recourse or discipline against an individual because there's an employee-employer relationship there. But the agencies can take their own recourse from a funding perspective. And it's not just individuals that can be in breach. Institutions can be in breach as well. And of course, we update the framework every 5 years. So as I was saying, what's a breach? This is a little bit better definition than what I was saying, you know, not doing what you're not supposed to be doing. This is a little bit more professional. So the breach of the framework is the failure to comply with any agency policy throughout the life cycle of a research project. So similar to the definition that I was referring to for RCR, it's from the, you know, the time that you're coming up with your research question through the collection of your data, the analysis of your data, dissemination, and the management of funds. And the scope of breaches is broader than the traditional research integrity breaches. So for example, I don't mean to highlight the US, but the US has a particular approach where it's falsification, fabrication, plagiarism. Those are the three main issues that they deal with. The framework is more broad. We're trying to look at, you know, questionable research practices as well. So it's a little bit more broad, but we see it as a responsibility to know a bit more about what's going on than just focusing on those types of research misconduct issues. And honest error versus intent. So I think this is really important because we all make mistakes. Nobody intends to do things wrong, but there are some people who try to cut corners on purpose. And so from our perspective, the intention of an act is not relevant to the determination of a breach. So if you did something on purpose or you did it innocently, but a breach is a breach, regardless whether you did it on purpose or not. You know, you run through a stop sign, it's still, you're breaking the law, whether you did it on purpose or you just didn't see the stop sign. So any contravention of the framework is a breach. However, intent is taken into consideration when deciding what type of recourse or discipline should be imposed against an individual. So that's what we take into consideration when we decide on the recourse. It's the impact and the intentionality of the situation. Things go wrong in research. So these are just a few examples. You know, participant welfare could be at risk if you're doing research involving animals. Researchers may build on published research that is false or fabricated. So if you have some, you know, a medical article, a medical publication that's out there and it's, you know, cited all the time, everybody's looking at it because it's innovative, and somebody decides, you know what, I'm going to build on that research. And if they're building on research that's made up, not only is that a waste of money, but could be unreliable, of course. And when you think of it, we want to make sure that the general public that reads these types of some of these articles, that they feel confidence in what they're reading. So we want to make sure that it is reliable. Credibility of the research enterprise may be diminished, of course. As I said earlier, one article in the newspaper can really impact, you know, 5 years of research. And the ability to apply or hold research grants could be impacted. So if you are found to thing is, if you are found to have been in breach of an agency policy, your ability to hold or apply for funds could be impacted as well. Examples, it's not an exhaustive list, but ideas of the types of breaches that we're interested in. And so fabrication and falsification of data, destruction of research records or data, plagiarism, self-plagiarism, invalid authorship, mismanagement of conflict of interest, misrepresentation in an agency application is a breach. Mismanaging your funds, of course, would be a breach. And breaching agency policy that with regards to certain types of research, and breach of agency policy and peer review. So as you can see, it's kind of like the opposite of the responsibilities that I was just referring to in a few slides ago. Types of agency recourse. Excuse me. A list of the types of recourse the agencies can take. And I was mentioning earlier that institutions can take their own discipline, and that's fine, but we have, examples of recourse that we can take. And as you can see, they kind of start from minor, and as they go down, it gets more significant in terms of recourse. So letter of awareness often happens when it's an honest error, right? We just want them to know that there was a mistake and make sure that they don't do it again. Could be a letter of reprimand. We can request training on a particular topic. Let's say the individual was found to have committed invalid authorship with regards to a publication. We can request that they take training on authorship, let's say. Correction of the research record is something that usually the institutions are responsible for making sure gets corrected, because it's the individual that works at the institution. But if it hasn't been corrected, we can request that the individual correct the research record. We can terminate a grant or award completely or partially. We can render somebody ineligible to participate in agency peer review or to hold or apply for agency funds. And in the most serious, egregious of situations, we can publicly disclose the situation. Curious if I ask the audience, how many times do you think since 2011, since the first framework was launched, that we've actually publicly disclosed? Look at Kelly, because she probably knows the answer. So just randomly thinking like 10, 20, 5, 1, 5, in between 2. And many of you may be saying, oh my God, in 13 years, you've only disclosed 2. It's got to have a pretty big high bar, because, disclosing something publicly can ruin somebody's career, right? And that's not, we're not in that business, right? We're in trying to make sure things get corrected. But when it's so egregious and there's like the possibility that individuals have been harmed or animals, then it's the president of the relevant agency. So if it's CIHR funded research, it would be the president of CIHR that would make a final decision and say, you know what, we're going to disclose this publicly, and it would be on our website. So it does happen, but it's a very high bar, and it really needs to, it needs to have an impact on the public, and or also bringing the conduct of research into disrepute. Breach. I think this is important to speak to. Scientific debate is not RCR issue. Like, you have 2 scientists that, have different opinions, that's fine. You can have difference of opinions, but it's not considered a breach of RCR to have a difference of opinion. Personal conflicts, work-related conflicts, HR-related conflicts, like harassment, sexual harassment, or what have you. Those are not good things, but they don't fall under the conduct of research. They usually fall under labor relations at the institution, and they have their own policies to deal with this. And university offenses, so cheating on an exam. That usually falls kind of under academic integrity as opposed to research. So these types of things would not fall under RCR. A little quicker on this, some key elements of the RCR framework. Every institution has to have an RCR contact, a designated RCR contact that deals with the policy and that also addresses allegations of breaches. And for the Heart Institute, it's Megan Riley, who is the contact. And in terms of anonymous allegations, we want to make sure that any allegation that somebody makes, even if they don't put their name to it, that it's going to be considered. Because in the past, we just wanted institutions to have a policy that says whether they would accept an allegation that's anonymous or not. But we noticed that institutions might just kind of hide behind that and say, well, it's not signed, we're not going to look into it, when there's actually sufficient information in the allegation that they don't have to go back to whoever's complaining about it to actually do something about it. Confidentiality of the process, it's a challenging situation to be a complainant, to come forward, to bring forward a concern, but it's also very difficult for the individual who's being alleged to have done something wrong. So we want to make sure that the confidentiality of the process is maintained throughout, because it's really innocent until proven guilty. You can't assume just because somebody made an allegation that what is being said is actually true. Mandatory inclusion of an external member. So institutions, like I said, are responsible for looking into these concerns. They would conduct an inquiry to determine if the allegation is responsible, and then decide if they have to do a formal investigation into this allegation. And we want to make sure that they have at least one external member on their investigation committees to ensure that there's an objective side to the process. And of course, public disclosures of breaches. So new updates to the framework real quick. The new responsibility with regards to the oversight, that individuals that have oversight roles in the conduct of research, that they provide appropriate supervision and training to their trainees and research personnel. As I said earlier, we have a definition of RCR. We clarified some definitions of breaches. We aligned some of the French terms to align with our counterparts' RCR policy in Quebec. And we also provided additional guidance for institutions when addressing allegations. So, good practices in RCR. This is something that I'm hoping is going to be beneficial to all of you, is things to think about. So, transparency and publication. Obviously, the basis of responsible publication is transparency to readers and publishers. So make sure to present your results honestly. Describe your methods clearly, reference any elements that aren't original to the work. List all authors and acknowledge contributors, and make sure to disclose funding sources and any conflicts of interest. Accurate presentation of images or figures in publications. Make sure you're aware and understand the appropriate ways for your discipline to present images and figures in publications. Disciplines vary, social sciences, natural sciences and engineering, biomedical, very different practices for different things. So make sure you know what your discipline requires. And if you don't know, ask. Doesn't hurt to ask. Ask a colleague or a supervisor. Consideration of conflicts of interest. So you want to make sure that, and this is kind of the acronym I use, is IDM. Identify, disclose, manage. Everybody, like I said, is going to have a conflict of interest at some point, but try to identify what that conflict of interest is, disclose it to the appropriate groups within your institution, and obviously come up with a plan to manage it. And try to identify, sometimes it's tough, but try to identify the conflicts of interest at the beginning of your research project, and develop some kind of mitigation plan with your supervisor to manage them properly. Appropriate supervision and training in the conduct of research. So for those in a supervisory role, make sure that you don't pressure your trainees or staff to cut corners or be over or unrealistic with deadlines to achieve a desired outcome. You don't want to kind of push somebody in that direction because they're trying to get something done quick in order to meet a deadline. Take the time to train trainees and research staff on how to conduct their research responsibly and answer questions. And for trainees and research staff, if you need more guidance done in the lab, or a technique, or interpreting results, ask your supervisor for help. It doesn't mean because you're asking that you are not a good researcher. It means that you're inquisitive and you want to make sure you're doing your job properly. And the other thing is avoid authorship disputes. We see a lot of authorship disputes that come to the Secretariat, where individuals are like, well, I should have been this second author, I should have been corresponding author, or what have you. It's really important to discuss the authorship when planning your research. Establish an authorship agreement, right, in writing, so that it's very clear who's responsible for what. The order of authors should be decided, jointly between the authors, and make it clear to the journal editor the reasons behind the author order. and describe what each author contributed to the research project. This said, everybody who's listed as an author on a publication is responsible for the contents of the publication. So if something goes wrong with that article, everybody's got to be prepared to explain what happened to that article. To raise awareness of responsible content research. So, you know, some universities will put together an RCR course for credit, which demonstrates obviously the importance of RCR within the institution. They might develop online or in-person training with case studies. And we've seen that a combination of online and in-person training is the best way to really learn and retain what is being said. And it gives you an opportunity to discuss, right? Where we can have a conversation after this presentation about questions that you might have. Dedicated weekly, monthly lab meetings to discuss different topics, or institution-wide RCR days or RCR weeks. Develop tools, dedicated RCR webpage, or one-stop shop for RCR. Develop monthly, quarterly newsletters. Develop checklists so people know what they have to think about when they're engaging in a new project. And university librarians are fantastic resources to help avoid publishing in a deceptive or predatory journal. I won't go into too much detail here because I know I'm running out of time, but it's important to, you know, 17 or in 2019 that the former executive director for Secretariat, Susan Zimmerman, came to the Heart Institute to talk about RCR. And I don't know if any of you were around then or you're all new, but you can have a refresher course. Like, just because you took RCR training once doesn't mean you know everything. Things change. It's good to get a refresher. And guest speakers on RCR topics of interest. So last, I have 2 more slides, I believe, and I'm done, I promise. So how does the Secretariat and the University of Ottawa Heart Institute each promote responsible cognitive research? So the Secretariat, we provide an interpretation service on the framework. So if you have any questions about interpreting any section or article of the framework, you can write to us and we'll provide you a written interpretation. But also, when we see the same type of question coming forward to the office, then we will create a public interpretation and post it on our website so that everybody can see it. Engagement with the research community to better serve its needs. We have a virtual community of practice, the RCR Forum, and there are a few people in this room that are members of the forum, and we meet quarterly by teams, just to talk about RCR topics of interest, not about RCR files, about, you know, breaches or anything. It's just about topics of interest. And sometimes we have invited guests who want to talk about a particular thing that they're doing at their institution, and they come and they talk about it. Consultations on the revisions to the framework. So in 2026, next revision is due. We will be going out for a public consultation prior to that to get feedback from the research community on proposed revisions. Presentations at conferences and institutions, what I'm doing now, and resources to educate the community. So we have tools, we have checklists, we have an RCR contact directory for all the contacts across the country. We've got templates, we have anonymized file summaries. And what that is on our website, it's a list of all of our confirmed breaches. So examples of confirmed breaches that we've seen over the last several years. We explain what was the issue, what did the institution find, what did we find, what was the recourse. So you can kind of get an idea, but there's no names, don't worry. There's no names associated with it. It's all anonymized, but it gives you an idea of the types of things we see. And maybe when you read 1 or 2, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, I actually do this, and this is what could have happened to me. So it may make you second guess, you know, something that you do in the future. We have statistics on files that we deal with, education and training support grants. And I think this is something interesting for the Heart Institute to know, if you don't already, is that we give grant money to institutions who want to hold events or activities that promote RCR or promote research ethics. And we have them twice a year. Our deadline is coming up for October 1st for the next set of grants. But we do have that. It's all on our website. And we also offer travel grants to individuals to help facilitate attendance to international conferences on responsible conduct of research. And the last thing is, the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, they have a designated, how are they dealing and promoting RCR? So they've got a designated RCR contact, as I was saying, it's Megan, and Dr. Rayner is the Chief Scientific Officer who's responsible for the policy itself, which is right there, policy 610 on responsible conduct of research. The UOHI is a member of the forum, as I said earlier, and in 2017, we actually gave a travel grant to one of the employees at the Heart Institute. It was Sharon Finley, who attended the Hong Kong conference in 2017. So last slide, key takeaway messages. RCR is everybody's business. Framework is an important tool through which the agencies promote responsible conduct of research. RCR education is critical to make sure that you foster that positive research environment within your institution. And the last, and one of the biggest things, if you can take away anything from my presentation, is that RCR should not be seen as a taboo topic. Many people think, oh my God, like when I'm walking down the halls in the office, they're like, oh my goodness, she's coming in my office, there must be something going on wrong, right? No, please do not think of Karen Wallace as a bad thing, right? So it's not a taboo subject. It should be talked about widely within your teams. It's to make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and to talk freely about it. So that is my presentation. And like I said, there'll be time for questions. And if we can't get to all of them, I've told Megan that I would be happy to get a list of what the questions are, and I can send them in writing back to her for her to share with the audience. So thank you very much.
Hello. So Katie had to leave, unfortunately, but I'm going to help moderate this session. Karen, thank you so much for your presentation. For those in the room, there's a floating mic, so anyone raise your hand and it'll be brought to you, and then I'll read the ones that are online. So I'll turn it over to Jody.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation, and sorry, I have to leave as well, so I wanted to quickly get this in. I have a comment and a question, and I guess my comment is that I mean, I think it's egregious enough if we think about falsification of data and the fact that research then builds on, a false record, and the public's money is then spent, kind of erroneously on this line of research that isn't valid. But I wanted to also say it's even beyond that. In my opinion, it's kind of an extreme example, but we don't have to, it's a real example if we think about, that one instance of the researcher falsifying the association between vaccines and on autism, and kind of the global impact that has had on vaccine hesitancy. So, we really have to think about, the trickle down consequences of this kind of thing. So I just wanted to make a comment that I think is really serious. And then a second question, I wondered within the update coming in the next couple of years, how the panel might be integrating in terms of specifically the definition of breach in terms of plagiarism and self-plagiarism, the use of generative AI platforms in terms of I'm sure you've had this question lots. So I'm really interested to hear what the comments are on that.
Yeah, great question. And if I would have more time, I'll obviously go into that, but definitely research security and artificial intelligence in the conduct of research is going to be a topic for discussion by the panel in the next little while. And we will definitely be seeing some kind of language in the next edition of the framework. It's just, AI evolves faster than you can, keep up with it. So what we want to make sure is what we put in the framework is practical, but also applicable, and it doesn't have to be changed every year, right? So we have to be, careful with not being too specific, but being specific enough that it means something. So great. You're welcome.
Peter Du. So this is fantastic. One thing which we always promote is the fact that RCR is so integral to good research, and that its prevention is always answer cure. And so these are a fantastic session. A question I'd like to checking with you has to do with secondary use of data. This is something that we work quite a lot, with Kelly and because we are currently, working on developing very large data platforms, for data sharing across Canada, particularly in brain and heart areas, but even going beyond that. And the challenge we have found is really the heterogeneity, in terms of practice. In terms of secondary use of data, of course, the principles of privacy and the security and confidentiality are observed, but the practice is very, very different in different institutions. So when we try to bring large data together, it's really, sort of mountains of work. I was just wondering whether there is some consideration of this, especially when the funding agencies really encourage the secondary use of data. And, so right now there's kind of a moment in which we're trying to seek, some guidance in this area.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Liu, for your question. And we've heard that before. And I'm looking at Kelly, and she's nodding. There is an understanding that from the agencies that there is a need to kind of think about this a little bit more with regards to that, these big data sets that are coming out, what direction they're going to go. It's still too early to discuss, but it's definitely on the topic of conversation. Yeah.
It's literally been forever in person, so it's really nice to do so. My question is very similar to Peter's, but a little bit more specific to data sharing. So the tri-agencies, like administering via SHRC, are rolling out their data management policy, of which the third mandate is data deposit. So it doesn't have to be open data, but there has to be some sort of data deposit. And it's apparently happening in 2025. I feel like as a researcher, I'm very supportive, obviously, of open data and data sharing, but I'm worried that your office is going to get really busy. Because people don't actually have the skills to prepare their data for data deposit, either openly or by restriction. So I just wanted to know if you could comment on that. My concern is that even well-intended researchers might share data in a way that's going to end up in a breach of what they have consent or permission to do, and what sort of discussions are happening at the national level between your office and the tri-agencies and this capstone thing that they're creating as well.
Lots of questions. Yes, thank you, Kelly. I'll start with the last one first about the capstone. Capstone is a very new thing that was announced in the budget in terms of where the agencies will kind of sit in the future. We don't have much information on that, so I'm not going to go into detail. We probably will get more information in the next fiscal update in the fall, which the fall is kind of now when you think of it. But in terms of data sharing, I totally get your appreciation that this could result in lots of things coming our way. And unless the agencies can provide enough guidance to the community on what is expected, I know they've got their, the data management policy, and they're trying to implement it, but you need to make sure that you understand the consequences of implementing something that could have a much broader impact than what they thought of when they first put it together. So there is conversation. I know Jeremy Galeen is part of the conversation. So thank you for raising that, and I will make sure that I share that with that group as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
To sort of AI, what other types of breaches are you seeing most commonly now at the Secretary, and what aligns as an appropriate response from the agency in those instances? Can you provide us?
Yeah, so that's good. I would say that depending on the year, so we have statistics on our website per year, and some years it's plagiarism that's the hot breach. Sometimes it's conducting your research without REB approval. Sometimes it's the other thing that we see is self-plagiarism. Falsification, fabrication is not, caveat that with, we are not the police, right? We are proactive. We're not proactive, or we're a reactive body, right? We're not going out there to see who's doing stuff wrong. It's when something is disclosed, then we look into it. But plagiarism, I would say, is pretty much always somewhat the highest. And in terms of the types of recourse that would be associated with plagiarism, it really depends on the intent, right? The intentionality and the impact. You know, if the plagiarism is in a grant application, well, it's not in the research record. The impact to the research record is not there. Not great that they do it, but still the impact is not there. If it's in, you know, 30 publications, then we'll probably be considering ineligibility to apply and hold funding. But if it's just, let's say in an application, it might be a letter of reprimand. So it really depends on the intent and the impact that will, and the nature of the breach that will result in whatever the recourse we decide is most appropriate. Well, in addition to the research security and the AI piece, I think we're going to also include some guidance about when institutions when allegations are made against institutions. Because right now it's all about individuals and there's no real guidance. We kind of point to the agreement and the agreement doesn't say much, to be honest. So we want to give a bit more guidance to individuals who want to come forward about, you know, institutions, but we don't want to encourage that, right? Because we don't want people to just the wrong reasons. What else will be there? I would guarantee that there's going to be more process-related guidance for institutions and researchers to know what is expected of them. And lastly, I think we're going to have some new definitions that will be added in terms of responsibilities. But like I said, we're not going to say this is what it's going to be. We're going to say, this is what we're thinking. Research community, what do you think? And then we'll listen to it. Because last year we updated the definition, or not last year, the last round in 2021, we updated the definition of falsification. Because in the past it was, in order for it to be falsification, your research results had to have been burnt correct, right? But when you think of it, if somebody's manipulating or falsifying data, it doesn't necessarily going to mean that the conclusions are different or wrong. We still have to address the fact that you're manipulating images. So we've modified it so it's not this equals that. It's if you are falsifying data, it's a fault. Like if you're falsifying data, it's a breach regardless of the impact. So I think we're going to try and make sure that we can firm up some of those definitions that might not be as clear. I don't want to go too far, because if I say, well, I think this is where it's going and the panel does not feel the same way, then I'd be leading you down the wrong path. But I think it's going to be a much more substantive revision this year than it was in 2021. 2021 was kind of like a few changes here and there, but it needs a really good rework.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Very much for your presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Megan to share about our internal processes around responsible conduct of research. And Megan will be doing a very abbreviated version of her original presentation, so thank you very much.
It's okay, I can't possibly follow that in any type of like wonderful way. So I am going to just fly through this. Really, the purpose of me standing here today is to make sure that you are aware that we at the Heart Institute are abiding by all of that wonderful stuff that Karen just presented on. Really, we have three main policies that address RCR at the Heart Institute. So responsible conduct of research, addressing allegations of breach of policy and research, and conflict of interest. I will be sharing these slides following today's presentation. There's a lot of good information in here, so I encourage you to look through these slides and sort of look at these Heart Institute specific guidance. So I'll fly through this. In terms of conflict of interest management, there's various ways that we collect conflict of interest at the Heart Institute, conflict of interest disclosures. We do it at onboarding, we do it annually, we do it through RIB applications and through notice of grant applications. So those are sort of all the ways that we collect those conflict of interest disclosures. And we have a committee at the Heart Institute that's responsible for looking at them when they involve people involved in research. So that membership is made up of various offices within research administration. This is the current membership. So if you're ever sort of thinking to yourself, I've submitted a conflict of interest disclosure, what happens with it? Well, it comes to the committee. We take a look at it. We help guide you, put mitigation plans in place, and we may even have to advise that a particular activity cease to happen anymore, but that's very rare. And then what's really important for you all to know is if you have a suspected allegation that something has gone wrong, there's a breach that you want to report, how do you do it here at the Heart Institute? Well, we have a form that you can fill out. We have a responsible conduct of research page on the Heart Institute, or on the Heart Hub rather. And so I've got a link here. So if you go to the responsible conduct of research page on the Heart Hub, it has the links to 2 versions of our allegation reporting form. So we have a PDF version, but we also have an electronic survey version, which allows you to submit these allegations completely anonymously. So we do have that mechanism in place so that if you are not comfortable coming forward and putting your name associated with that allegation, you can do it anonymously. So that's our mechanism for you have the ability to report an allegation. And then in terms of your contacts here at the Heart Institute, so Dr. Rayner, our CSO, she is the person in my mind who's like in charge of RCR, and then I'm her helper B. So any sort of questions related to responsible conduct of research and conflict of interest, please direct them to us. We're here to help and support. And in terms of training, so you would have had to do training at onboarding as part of you being brought into the Heart Institute. You would have had to complete a conflict of interest declaration form. There was a training associated with that. And then we require annual training on both responsible conduct of research and conflict of interest. And we do that as part of that annual collection of conflict of interest disclosures. So you are automatically prompted, here's your training, here's your disclosure, you have to submit it. Okay, that was the super Coles Notes version. So in recognition of time, any questions you have, feel free to either email me, you can come up, I'll hang out for a little bit, you can come up and ask me after